characteristic of that would be able to perform a function.
So impermanent?
No, the defining characteristic of impermanent is momentary.
Momentary. Yeah, this is true.
This came in the first, the opening query of the chapter.
Conditioned.
Yeah, conditioned phenomena.
Conditioned. Yes.
That's what we're investigating. Conditioned phenomena and its three characteristics. So some people know that as compounded phenomena. Some people know it as composed phenomena. It's kind of one of those terms that, not so easy to translate. Well, they translate, but it's using a useful translation, a good one. So that in Sanskrit is samskirta. So that is explained. So if you say it's the characteristics has something to do with arising, lasting, and destruction, got slightly different definitions from different monasteries. But never mind the definition, the way it's explained etymologically, what does that word mean? The Sanskrit word, samskirta. So how would you explain that? So just to remind you of that it is that which has been created, that's the kirta bit, by causes in union and combination. So the union and combination bit is the sam. And skirta means like created. So it means created by causes and conditions coming together, coming and sort of, uniting or mixing together and then producing the effect, which is the conditioned phenomena itself. So it's anything which is impermanent, anything which is a functioning thing, anything which is, just the usual type of object we usually meet in the world when we're talking about objects of the senses or our consciousnesses and other things too. So time, all these things are all conditioned phenomena. It's not that all phenomena are conditioned, though. Can you give us an example of a phenomenon that's not conditioned, Tom?
Uncomposed space.
Uncomposed space or unconditioned space, I suppose we should be saying at this point if we're using conditioned as a translation. Yeah, so that's a sheer absence. That's a mere, abstract phenomena, yeah. It's only there just through, the mind kind of registering it, rather than it being out there made of molecules or something you can bump into, or something that's going through its own process of transforming under the influence of cause and effect. It is just permanent phenomena, static phenomena, an unchanging phenomena. And you can see there's a mere absence, yeah. So it's like it's a sheer absence of obstruction and contact. It's a sheer absence of anything being there type of thing, yeah. So it's a mere kind of negative phenomena. So it's a bit different from sort of your ordinary conditioned phenomena like bicycle or your leg or something. Another example of conditioned phenomena, Tom? Unconditioned phenomena?
One with pot.
One with pot. Yeah, okay, well, okay. Yeah, that's so you can get into some quite abstract phenomena, when you're talking about different permanent phenomena. And slightly less abstract one like emptiness or nirvana, these phenomena like that are also sheer negative phenomena, actually, permanent. We haven't really got the time to spend a lot of time investigating the difference between permanent and impermanent phenomena, so we're just going to go with conditioned phenomena for now. But yeah, don't imagine that all phenomena whatsoever are conditioned. So so we want to know about conditioned phenomena, and so it's the characteristics are something to do with arising, lasting, and destruction. But we'll look at some refinements of that in a minute. Yeah. So the opponent has said, look, the characteristics, such as arising, lasting, and destruction, they exist. Yeah. So that means that your conditioned phenomena exist also, right? Because Nagarjuna was, in the business of denying everything, isn't he? The way that he's approaching things, it's like this very radically, it's not there on the ultimate level. You'll never find it. There's no arising, no ceasing, right? And there's no permanence and no severance. There's no sameness and no difference. So he's approaching things like that. So he's quite willing to say there are no conditioned phenomena. There's no such thing as arising or lasting or destruction. So how does the chapter start off then? Well, as we said, the opponent, he's saying, yeah, so you've got arising or lasting and destruction. You can't deny those. So when you have something that has, is involved with those three characteristics, then you've got conditioned phenomena. So conditioned things. So what's the problem? Well, there are many problems, according to Nagarjuna's approach. We haven't got to Nagarjuna's words yet. These are just Buddhapalita's words. The opening prose and the first remarks are by Buddhapalita. But then he brings in a verse from an earlier chapter. Yeah. So the person who's saying that you can judge that conditioned phenomena, conditioned things exist because their characteristics exist, is told off. He says, no. The characteristics of the conditioned are not tenable. So how will the conditioned exist? Yeah, if you haven't got any characteristics, how are you going to have a conditioned phenomena having those characteristics? So then if you ask about how's that? What's that all about? Then Buddhapalita quotes a line from a previous verse, from chapter 5 it is, isn't it? So all you get in the quotation from Buddhapalita, it's not the complete verse. He says, no characteristic manifests in that without, or in that with a characteristic. Just to get the whole verse, because it's quite a good verse really, if you look in the notes just down below in note 2, you get the whole complete verse given for you. No characteristic manifests in that without, or in that with a characteristic, nor elsewhere than in that with or that without. So that's Buddhapalita's opening remarks. See, it's not saying, yeah, well, let's look at examining and examine arising and lasting and destruction one by one and go through them, which is going to do. But it doesn't start off by, going to that kind of detail. It just, let's talk about characteristics and object characterized in general. And there you've already got a problem. What is the problem? Well, if you've got these characteristics then, and they're supposed to characterize the object characterized, and those of us who are familiar with like the collected topics terminology, we can say you've got we use like definition. Yeah, you've got a definition, which is the object defined, which is the same as the object characterized. And again, you've got the defining characteristics, or sorry, I got it mixed up. You get the definiendum. Sorry, definiendum is the object characterized. So think of that as another word for object characterized. If that's a word you've heard before, definiendum, the object defined, the object characterized. So that would be like functioning thing, as Yael mentioned. And then you've got the characteristics. So that's so in that case, that would be the definition, yeah. The defining characteristics which make that object defined what it is. Simplest example is something as we used last week, fire and hot and burning. Fire is the thing characterized. Fire is a definiendum, or the object characterized. And the hot and burning are the characteristics. The definition, yeah. So it's just that kind of play, that kind of setup that we're examining. Yeah, so, and as I said last week, I have to remind you of this, I think, yeah. So somebody like, says, well, what's all this fancy philosophical talk? What's that got to do with us, down here with our feet on the ground? Characteristics and object characterized, that's all about, what's the point? But it's very much the way we talk in the world. It's very much the way we operate, isn't it, If you go into a shop and you say, I don't know, you say, I want a lawnmower or something, you walk into a shop that sells lawnmowers. So immediately the guy's got to say, well, this customer, what kind of lawnmower does he want? He's immediately going to start thinking of that, isn't he? So he can either just say straight out, what kind of lawnmower do you want? Or he could say, okay, so what kind of lawn have you got? What kind of a lawn is this lawnmower going to have to cut, you see? So he's just trying to decide, what kind of lawnmower to try and sell you. What's going to suit your purpose? So every lawnmower's got general characteristics, but how big is your lawn? Is it a little tiny thing, they're just, 2 meters square, so you don't even need a motor, a kind of a lawnmower with a motor, really. You can do it with a mower without a motor almost. Well, you've got a bigger piece, or have you got an electric point that's near to where you're going to cut the grass, so you can have an electric motor? Do you like sort of electric things that have batteries? Prefer those to these lawnmowers that use fossil fuel? So he's immediately thinking about the characteristics of different types of lawnmower, isn't he? The size they've got to be, and is it so big that you're going to sit on it, and you're going to drive it around like a little tractor because you've got quite a big field to cut, So obviously we're immediately dealing with the object defined and its characteristics. So the world is just full of that kind of, calculation and that kind of, description, that kind of figuring out things. This is the object and these are the characteristics we want it to have, So it's not something that is just up in the air, just for philosophers. It's quite like, just the kind of things that people talk about in the world, even if they don't use the word object characterized and characteristics so often. They're dealing in those terms a lot of the time. Yeah, so well, how is it going to be though here? We've got our kind of simplest example, then maybe hot and burning. So they're the characteristics. Fire is the object characterized. But now the question Buddhapalita is asking, how will the characteristics characterize the object? How will the characteristics come to appear in the base, in the object characterized? So that's all he's asking. And it says you've got two choices, yeah? So the characteristic can manifest, in an object that has that characteristic, or it can manifest in the object that doesn't have that characteristic. Yeah. So, yeah, or the characteristic can manifest somewhere else, okay, But we're talking about the characteristic of the object, so you'd expect the characteristic to manifest within the object, right? Not outside the object, so that would be a bit odd. So it's got to somehow appear, come to appear in the object characterized. So maybe you say, well, first you have fire, and then so the characteristics hot and burning will manifest in the object without characteristics. So that might make sense at the first glance, yeah. So you have the object fire, then you have the characteristics coming along and manifesting there. Hot and burning appears. But that doesn't make sense, says Nagarjuna, because how would you have fire without hot and burning in the first place? Yeah, so the object fire would have to be kind of empty, and then the characteristics will come along and fill it. But that's ridiculous, says Nagarjuna, because if you had a fire that isn't hot and burning to start with, well, how would it be fire? You know, how could it be fire without being hot and burning right from the time when it begins to be fire? At that time, it has to be hot and burning. Yeah, so you can't have the object characterized there first and the characteristics coming along and manifesting in an object without characteristics. Fire without the characteristics of hot and burning is just impossible. Yeah. Okay, so let's try and get a mind around that. And then, so the alternative to that is that, well, okay, then the characteristics, they appear in an object that has the characteristics of hot and burning. So this is the second alternative. So the fire is there with the characteristics hot and burning, and then hot and burning come along and characterize it. But that's also ludicrous, you know, because if the fire is hot and burning already, so then what's the point of these characteristics of hot and burning coming along and characterizing it? Yeah, so then you've got two sets of hot and burning, right? You've got one that's the fire's got already, and then the characteristics come to appear in a manifest in that, and then there's like a second hot and burning coming along to join the first ones. So if that's possible, then then why can't you have a third set of hot and burning coming along to join the second one? And the fourth one, then it could become an endless series. Yeah, if one isn't enough and the second one comes along and joins, then that's okay. And maybe we should have a third one and a fourth one coming along. So you'd have lots of sets of hot and burning joining and appearing in this fire. So that doesn't sound very sensible either. So where is this question? Where is Nagarjuna heading to? So not much explanation in the text. So that means I've got to explain it. Well, I guess there is an explanation in chapter 5, right? Maybe we were all supposed to have read chapter 5 already. I don't know. But I think you've got to drop in somewhere. So we'll try and explain that. But can you see the problem, yeah? So how would we answer that, because this is typical Nagarjuna argument. Yes, says, okay, you've got two alternatives. It either is or it isn't, or it does or it doesn't. And if you say, yes, it does, then there's some big fault with that nobody can accept. And if you say, well, it doesn't, then there's a big fault with that alternative and nobody can accept that. And there's no other third possibility, you see. Either it does or it doesn't, there's no other way that it's of it being possible. You could say, well, a characteristic manifests somewhere else apart from where the fire is, but that would be kind of pretty not so much of a good idea, is it? So there is that third possibility, but who's going to go along with that? Yeah. So hot and burning is going to be where the fire is, yeah. So it's not going to be some other place. So this is the first poser that we're posed with in this chapter then. So what we're going to answer? Yeah, so we're not dealing with people who are, we're not dealing with people who, it's not a purely theoretical question, let's say. Nagarjuna is arguing against people who, as the way he interpreted it, this is the question they had to answer and they couldn't answer. So that's why he's knocking down their view. He's using this argument to refute Buddhist philosophers of other schools. He's coming along with the middle way view. As I say, it's quite a sort of a later development in the history of Buddhist thought. So they're already very sort of strong and mainstream Buddhist, whatever they call schools of philosophy or schools of tenets, Buddhist systems where they got the Buddhist teachings organized, and they sort of figured things out. So they thought, they debated with each other. It's not like everybody's agreeing with each other until Nagarjuna comes along. No, he's not the first person to make to make a debate. You can have a debate going. These other schools have debated against each other from the beginning, you know, because that's the way it's going to be, isn't it? You know, to get down to the deeper understanding of Buddha's view, of course, there's going to be like questions and doubts and people arguing from one point of view, people arguing from another point of view, but they kind of settle down into a couple of these sort of what they call Abhidharma schools, which we could call the Great Expositionist school, and we can call the Sutra follower schools. So these are two of the sort of more kind of Buddhist schools that predated Nagarjuna. So they are, you know, quite well set up. Of course, you know, the communications, the systems, the way things were in India at that time, it wouldn't be like it is nowadays. You know, people had to communicate across immense distances, and the means of communication were relatively very simple. People had to walk everywhere, you know, so it was a different setup. But in the main, you know, there was like centers in India where these schools were very popular or very, you know, well studied, and you know, they were kind of mainstream, as I say. You know, so Nagarjuna's come along saying, but wait a minute, you know, there's some fundamental flaw in your view, and what is it? Well, he's accusing them of grasping at inherent existence, you see. So they have their views, you know, they have subtle views of, you know, this is the Buddha taught, when we taught emptiness, this is the kind of, you know, the real kind of thing you meditate on to get out of cyclic existence, this selflessness, this sort of ultimate view. But Nagarjuna is saying, yeah, but, you know, does it make sense? You know, have you really got down to the bottom of it? Have you really got down to the subtle level? And so this is one argument where he's accusing them, you know, showing them that they haven't finished the job. You know, their schools only go halfway or partway and don't really get to the, you know, get to the sort of, you know, some sort of coherent, really logical conclusion. So the Great Expositionists, their school is kind of, in a way, at this point, the simplest, because they say, well, everything's got to have a different substance from everything else. Their idea is that, you know, everything should sort of have some sort of substantial existence, and therefore everything has to have its own, its own substance. You know, it's even sort of permanent phenomena kind of have substance for those guys, whatever that means. You know, dravya. You know, so they're all kind of everything has to have its own kind of sort of kind of ground level existence, so sort of real existence. The Sautrantikas are being a bit more advanced, or let's say, I don't know, a bit more kind of sophisticated, where they sort of said, well, some phenomena are just merely conceptually imputed. Yeah, not every phenomena has to be a substance. You know, not everything has to be like, you know, grounded in kind of, you know, its own kind of nature, which is kind of, you know, totally independent. So the sutra followers, or the Sautrantikas in Sanskrit, are saying, yeah, so we can have things that are, you know, conceptually different, but you know, in the end, are the same nature, the same substance. Yeah, so I hope most of you are familiar with these ideas. Some of you won't be, but in general, we've studied this in earlier classes, so, you know, I can't spend too much time kind of explaining you know, the ins and outs of this. But you can see that the Sutrarians, for instance, if you ask them, they're going to say, well, oh yeah, well, fire and hot and burning, they're just the same nature. They aren't different substances. They're the same substance. Fire and hot and burning, yeah. So the object defined, the object characterized, and the characteristics, you know, that don't make such a big difference between them. They're just the same nature, you know. So we accept that. So what's the problem? Where's your argument going? Fire and hot and burning, you know, wherever you find fire, you'll find hot and burning. Wherever you find hot and burning, you'll find fire. You know, they're just two, you know, different conceptual appearances of the same substance. Get off our back, you know. You kind of Prasangikas, you kind of, you know, consequentialists of the higher school, so you call them middle wayers. You Nagarjuna middle wayers who just try to deny everything. You know, but it's not going to work. We've got fire and hot and burning sorted out very well, thank you. You know, so your arguments aren't touching us. Maybe we should just look at the meaning of same substance here. So this is one of the things I put in the chat. There's one PDF called Same Substance. So maybe click that, it should open. Very short, but this is just to help you or remind you, the guys who've studied this before. So it says same substance. It should be in the chat. If there isn't, if it's not in everybody's chat, maybe, I don't know, Jason, can you do something about that? Some people who joined late, maybe.
No, it isn't. I can download it again and put it back up. Or you just drag it back. If you just drag it back in to where you did before, then.
Well, has everybody got the document, same substance, or has somebody not got it?
A couple might not have it because they arrived a little bit later, but I'll pop it back in.
But they would, I think they were just the guys here in our.
Oh.
Here in the Lander. Have you got the document? And they know it anyway. They know the definition, so don't worry about them.
Well, I've popped it back in anyway.
So how would you say two things of the same substance, Dundru?
Same substance. Just to a direct perceiver that appears to it, it does not appear to it.
Not bad. He's saying it appears to a direct perceiver and doesn't appear separate, but he should say they. You know? We're talking about two things being the same substance. One, they are different, but to the direct perceiver to which they both appear, they do not appear separately. Simple example would be like orange, the color orange, and color itself. Yeah, so think when you look at the color orange, orange is appearing to your mind, but color will also appear into your mind, surely.
Isn't that the definition for one nature?
Now, one nature is includes permanent things. You see, here we are discussing things which appear to direct perceivers. So, in the Sautrantika point of view, only functioning things appear to direct perceivers. So, here we're talking about same substance. If you're talking about same nature, well, there are things, permanent phenomena don't appear to direct perceivers in the Sutra follower schools view. You see, so they can't be. They're not quite the same. But you know, you sort of say to them, well, if they did appear to a direct perceiver, they wouldn't appear separately, sort of thing, you know. But yeah, I mean, we don't have to worry too much about that. Same substance, same nature. We can use this we can use this here when we're talking about fire and hot and burning. So when you see the color orange, Tom, do you think you see color as well?
Yeah.
Well, how does it appear to the mind when orange appears? You're looking at the color orange. How does the color itself appear to your mind?
Implicitly.
Implicitly. Well, implicitly usually means it doesn't appear. Explicitly is with the aspect, you know.
Yeah.
Appearing. Implicitly means like it doesn't appear, but still you realize it. So they are the same nature. Color and orange, the color orange, you know, orange and the color orange, that specific color, and color in general, instance and generality, you know. So when orange appears, color appears. They are the same substance. They are the same nature, you know. Orange is just orange color, you know. It's just in the very nature of being a color, isn't it? You know. So how could it have a different nature? Anyway, so they do appear, but you've got to think about how they appear. So, Francois, do you accept then that color appears when orange appears to your eye consciousness? Color itself appears, Francois?
Yes.
Did you say yes?
When
Your voice is a bit faint. You said yes.
you hear me?
Very faintly.
Yes. I got a connection cut, so I'm not
really sure I got your question.
Okay. Well, Handley, when orange appears to your mind,
Yes.
does that appear to your mind also?
Accept.
That sounds louder. Yeah, I've got a speaker now.
Yeah.
Yes. So, how does color appear? What does it look like when you're looking at orange and you're saying color does appear? How does color look?
Color appears as orange.
Hmm. But if you're saying color in general, that should be a nice mixture of different colors, shouldn't it? Red, orange, blue, green, and all that kind of thing. Yeah. So, are you just going to say color just appears as orange?
Yeah, because you can't have other colors appearing when orange is appearing. I mean,
So we can't say that color appears then, because only orange appears. So general color doesn't appear.
there's an instance of color appearing, so therefore color is appearing.
Say that again, please.
An instance of color is appearing, so therefore color is appearing.
So if an instance of color appears, color necessarily appears.
Accept.
So if an instance of fruit appears, then fruit necessarily appears.
Accept.
So we're talking about eye consciousness, right? So if a banana appears, fruit necessarily appears.
Accept.
Mm-hmm. So then, so what would be the difference between the appearance of banana and appearance of fruit at that point?
There is no difference for a direct perceiver.
Well, fruit must have some different appearance to banana.
Not to the direct perceiver.
Not to that direct perceiver, yeah. Okay, with some direct perceivers, oranges can appear or strawberries can appear, but this one, we're just looking at a banana.
There's only one object,
Yeah. So that's right. See, so the banana and fruit won't appear separately. So think about that. Why doesn't the fruit have to have a different appearance? Because it's a much more general thing, and then includes all those other different kinds of fruit. So how can color, when orange appears, how can color just appear in the form of of orange, in that shade of orange? Shouldn't there be some extra, sort of thing you might think? But no, they are two things that are the same substance. That's just an example. Maybe fire and hot and burning are a little bit easier because we're not talking about a generality and an instance. We're talking about a object characterized and its characteristics. Yeah. Definiendum and definition. So they are like mutually pervasive. It's not like one is a larger category containing a lot of things that the other one doesn't contain. They're both kind of the same, whatever. They're equivalent. They're mutually inclusive. Whatever is hot and burning is fire. Whatever is fire is hot and burning. So, that's maybe easy to deal with, but it's just getting into the idea of two things being the same nature or the same substance. So then when hot and burning and fire appear, would they have a different appearance to conception? What do you think about that one, Yael?
I think they have a different appearance from conception. Yeah.
No, to perception, to perceive the direct
To perception, no.
A touch consciousness, yeah?
To perception, no. To conception, yes.
Yeah. So here we're talking about this may probably a tangible object. Fire is a tangible object, yeah, it's an object of touch. So not talking so much about eye consciousness, but still direct perceiver of the physical body, tactile sense consciousness type. So yeah, a fire and hot and burning. Why should they have a different appearance to perception? They're the same nature. Okay, so the Sautranticus, the sutra follower guys that Nagarjuna is kind of digging at, attacking as like or questioning, they think they've got it all sorted out. So there would be a different appearance to conception, would there, Yael, between hot and burning on the one hand and fire on the other hand?
Yes.
What difference would you note there?
It's like we said, we have the object characterized and the characteristics. So it's like
Yes.
different angle that we approach.
Yeah, so we are, there's at least that difference. You say, well, that's a very artificial difference, but it's still a difference, yeah, because one is classed as, the object we're referring to, and then the other is saying, well, what does something have to be to be that object? Yeah? And like, we always use you have to bring in the idea, the example of a baby, yeah. So they don't have much conceptual apparatus. They don't have, this little baby doesn't have, this compartment of fire in its conceptual categories, you see. It's never learned the word fire. It's never learned to separate fire out, and refer to it by means of the term fire. So you put the baby puts his hand too near the fire, and yeah, he feels hot and burning. Yeah, the baby feels, maybe it burn the fingers, it's very painful. Anyway, they have an experience of hot and burning, but they can't put it in the category fire, you see, because they haven't learned the word fire that the word fire goes with that object. So the mother gets very cross, says, don't put your hand in the fire, don't be silly. Or, well, maybe she's not cross, she's just trying to be kind, but, she says, don't put your hand in the fire, don't touch the fire. See, so the baby kind of gets the message somehow, miraculously. The baby realizes that the fire is that word which refers to the thing that's just caused him or her so much pain, yeah. But you could have that little baby that knows hot and burning, but doesn't know fire, you see. Because to know fire, it means you have to know it, because it's a definition of the object defined. It has to be known, initially in connection with the term which refers to it. Yeah, so that's the one difference between a definition and definiendum, the characteristic and the opposite characterized. But anyway, that's kind of another detail. But it's just to say that there are these differences between hot and burning and fire. One is an object characterized, the other is a characteristic. But it isn't just a dry kind of unnecessary distinction, as we say. That has those have real meaning in the world. You go into a shop and say, I want a lawnmower, and they say, okay, well, what kind of lawnmower do you want? So then you have to start, well, what characteristics do I need for my lawnmower? How powerful do I need it to be? How much money do I want to spend? How big is my lawn and all that? So, they're definitely differences we will know, but they're with our conceptual mind. So anyway, that's just getting to think a little bit about characteristic and object characterized, same nature. But you see, the problem is, according to Nagarjuna's, in-depth understanding, if two items are inherently existent, then what's the problem? The problem is that then they should each have their own, independent and kind of standalone, sort of from within themselves unique nature. So this is getting at the meaning of inherent existence, which I haven't really tried to explain that. And why am I bringing that in? Well, this is Nagarjuna's, trying to get at this deeper understanding of selflessness, deeper understanding of the emptiness of all phenomena. So, Nagarjuna is saying, where's the suffering of the world coming from? It's coming from our ignorance, right? So he's not alone in saying that. All the other Buddhists will probably be agreeing with him quite happily. So what kind of ignorance is it that is, holding us down in this world where suffering keeps on and on occurring? What kind of keeps us, tangled up so that we can't just kind of, lift our minds above and, have nothing to do with it. We don't want to come to this world where there's all this suffering, or, if we come to it, we want to come to it able to, be somehow you know, a bit detached from the suffering, you know, so that we can help other people, but we don't get so, you know, sort of, you know, pain, so getting such painful experiences, and not know how to get out of them, and kind of be addicted, and kind of repeating the same mistakes over and over again, and suffering more and more again, and reborn again and again, and often in places a lot worse than the place we're in now. Yeah, so he's saying he's grasping at inherent existence, that's doing it. So you've got to say that nothing has any inherent existence. So when he's saying there's no arising, there's no ceasing, there's no going, and there's no coming, and so forth, he's saying there's no inherently existent arising, no inherently existent ceasing, there's no inherently existent coming, no inherently existent going. So you've got to work out what it means by inherently existent. Yeah. So again, that's something we could go into. And so we have to talk about it a bit, but you know, hopefully most of you have sort of wondered about that a lot before already. So, you know, you're familiar with the terms that describe what we're talking about, even if it's very hard to pin down, you know, and exactly, you know, refute it, because it's, you know, it is such a subtle thing that, you know, even though we've had many teachings on it, you know, we don't quite get the point, right? Anyway, this is going to help us, I hope, but that's the whole point of the thing. We're not just studying Nagarjuna's philosophy just because it's, you know, the Buddhist thing to do or something. Yeah? We do want to get rid of our suffering and cut through that deep ignorance. We have to refute inherent existence. So you can say to the Sautrantikas then, this is where you're going wrong. You're grasping at inherent existence. You've got to stop. And then you can start to understand what Buddha's really talking about when he's talking about emptiness. But they say, yeah, but that's too radical. You know, if you say there's no arising, no ceasing, no coming, no going, you know, you're destroying everything. You're not getting to a place of safety and peace. You're just going to a place of nihilism. You know? You're just saying, oh, you know, nothing can be found from its own side. Nothing has its own reality. Nothing has any inherent, you know, or independent nature of its own. So then how can it possibly exist? Is everything just supposed to be like a mere, you know, impression of the mind or something like that? Everything's merely supposed to be just a kind of an appearance to mind. Is that kind of what you're saying? There's no reality from the object's own side. There's no substance there that the object kind of, you know, gives the object its sort of grounding, give the objects its truth. You know, there's nothing there by way of the object. If it's all mere mental appearance, then what kind of worldview is that? So we're not onto the mind-only school here. The mind-only school had not arisen when Nagarjuna's teaching, you see. So the mind-only school equally needs to be refuted. And the middle way view that Nagarjuna is, you know, sort of advertising, you know, from taking it from the Buddha's Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, it equally applies to the mind-only view, and it cuts down the mind-only view just as it cuts down the view of these schools we're talking about here. The great expositionists and the sutra followers. Oh yeah, but you know, Nagarjuna is not sort of really attacking them because they haven't really come on the scene at his you know, at his era. They come along a bit later, and people like Chandrakirti, you know, these other Madhyamikas have a go at them, Shantideva. But here we're talking about these people who are, you know, the sutra followers or the great expositionists, and you can see so. The point is then that if everything has its own reality from its own side, you know, just existing by way of its own characteristics, then that should be true of fire and hot and burning as well. So if that's true of fire and hot and burning, then, you know, fire and then hot and burning should each have their own, you know, independent way of existence. They should have their own individual natures, which are, you know, independent of each other. So that's the kind of, you know, the way things have to be if things are inherently existent. So this is how Nagarjuna is, you know, addressing the sutra followers and the great exposition is. He says, okay, so you've got fire and hot and burning there. So how are they going to sort of, you know, cooperate and be, you know, be what they're supposed to be, like each one just you know, together with the other. And the Sutra follower says, yes, well, they're the same nature, right? They are the same nature. We are not. They are one substance. There's not two substances here. We're not saying that fire and hot and burning are two different sets of molecules or something, two different sets of atoms. And how do they then, you know, mix together or something? We're not saying that fire and hot and burning are two substances, two separate substances. We are saying they're one substance. And then you're just two ways of looking at the same thing. So what's the problem? But Nagarjuna is saying, if you say things are inherently existent, then each one has to be, you know, inherently existent and, you know, independent of the other. You know, it's just like the self and the aggregates, the self and the parts of the self. Once you say, well, if they're inherently existent, you know, then how can one depend on the other? That's not allowed. You know, if they're inherently existent, they just have to be there by their own strength. So that's the whole point of meditating on selflessness. You know, there's neither self is neither one with the aggregates nor separate from the aggregates. It's neither inherently one with the aggregates nor inherently different from the aggregates. It's to see that inherently anything is impossible here. And you have to end up admitting that, yeah, you know, the self is only there independent upon the aggregates. But once the self's depending on the aggregates, then it no longer has any, you know, inherent power to exist all by itself then, does it? It only exists in a dependent way. So when you've meditated on that a little bit, you know, this idea of, you know, applying the same, you know, analysis that you do to self and parts there, or that you do to instance and generality, you know, here you can apply exactly the same analysis to object characterized and characteristics. So that's basically what Nagarjuna is saying here, you see.
Keshe Graham,
Yes,
is it possible to ask a question?
yes, you're very welcome.
So I don't quite understand. It sounds to me that if you say that fire and hot and burning are the same nature, doesn't that automatically like refute inherent existence?
Well, it should do. Once you have two things which are different but the same nature, and then that should refute inherent existence. Same nature, one nature. Like, you know, if you just have one thing alone, like pot, you know, saying pot is one nature, you know, pot is just, that's one nature, no problem. But if you have two things that are supposed to have, you know, it's supposed to be one nature or be the same nature, like fire and hot and burning, then, you know, how could they be inherently existent? So that's exactly what Nagarjuna is getting at. That's exactly what he's saying to them. If you accept two things being the same nature like that, then how can you possibly claim that they're still inherently existent?
Okay.
But they want to claim that. Because they say if you don't, you know, if there's nothing from the side of the object, you know, if inherently existent is merely dependent, yeah? So that means that there's no nature of the object, say fire or hot and burning, from the side of the object. So then that everything ends up just as mere mental appearance to them. And they say, what kind of world are you trying to, you know, what kind of world are you trying to, you know, describe here? Everything's merely imputed by conception, you say. So this is the sutra followers, you know, replying back to the middle wayers, to the Nagarjuna types. So they're saying that, just that, you see, if everything's merely a mere appearance, yeah? So if the object doesn't appear from the object side, if the object doesn't exist from the object side, so where is it going to exist from? What kind of existence is it going to have? Well, the only thing you're going to say more or less is that it's just going to come from the mind side. There's some sort of mental discrimination, some sort of mental, you know, apprehending from the mind side, you know. But if there's no basis from the object side, then the Sautrantics are saying, well, anything you imagine then is going to be true, isn't it? Anything you dream up, any concept you have would have to, we'd have to have some, that we'd have to say, well, that exists merely because I've thought of it. But so many of the things that we do think of just don't exist and couldn't possibly exist. I can imagine a kind of a flower pot on top of my head or something with a nice flower growing out of it, but just by me imagining it, it doesn't make it exist. So if you can't discriminate between reality and things you're just imagining, then how are you going to present the path to liberation? How are you going to have the Four Noble Truths? This is the cause of suffering, and this is the cessation of suffering, and this is the path to the cessation of suffering, and so forth. How do you present that with your wacky middle way view? So no thanks, we're holding on to inherent existence. When you look for the object from the object's own side, it has to be there. Fire has to be something which has its own, own nature and power of existing, own characteristics by its own power. So that's all very necessary. So these are, kind of both sides have got good points, haven't they? Or you might, it seems to me they have, both sides have got a good argument for their own view. So it's not so simple. Yes, you say, oh, if two things of the same nature, they can't possibly be inherently existent. Well, good argument, yeah. But the Sautrantikas are kind of come back with their own kind of determined answer, aren't they? Anybody else got any questions? Yeah, by all means, ask if you have a question now.
Yeah, I've got one. I'm just trying to think about, if someone says, oh, the characteristics are already there, when we were talking just previously about hot and burning, either it's on the thing already or it's added later, which both don't make sense. Or, that's what Nagarjuna was saying.
Yeah.
We say things like, oh, okay, there's fire, it's hot and burning. The characteristics are already there. So it would make no point. There'd be no point in saying, then we say it's hot and burning. I don't quite get the argument. It doesn't seem to be really that effective just to say there's no point in saying hot and burning is already hot and burning. Do you get what I mean? It's like, well, why not? Why does it matter just because it sounds illogical, or not even illogical to us, just odd to us, that it might not be there already? Basically, it just doesn't seem a strong enough argument to me.
I'm not quite sure where you're at, Jason, but
yeah, I'm not.
Does the fire, does the characteristics come along and manifest in a fire that's without hot and burning to begin with, and then the hot and burning comes along and joins it? So the hot and burning characterizes a fire that isn't already hot and burning. Or else the fire is already hot and burning, so the characteristic comes along and characterizes something that is already hot and burning. So which are you choosing?
Yeah, the second one. The characteristic comes along that's already hot and burning, right? And then Nagarjuna says, oh, he's said to have said, well, what's the point in that if it's already hot and burning? Well, why is there no point in that if it's already hot and burning?
If it's already hot and burning, what's the point of being of the characteristics hot and burning turning up and joining the party? It's already hot and burning, so it doesn't need hot and burning to come along and make it hot and burning.
Yeah, no.
You've already been born from your mother. You don't need to be born again.
Yeah, totally. So what's the problem?
Well, then you'd have two sets of hot and burning. The one that it already has, by way of its very own nature being fire, and then the characteristics that come along and make it fire.
Unless we're just naming the characteristics, do you know what I mean? We observe them and we just say, no, that's hot and burning. I mean,
well, that's how it is, isn't it? We're looking at the thing, and from one point of view, we see it as fire. From the other point of view, we say, oh, no, what characteristics is hot and burning? So we're really looking at the same thing, the same substance, remember? Same substance. And we're just looking at it from two different points of view. But if they say like, there's two things here. There's the characteristics and there's the object characterized. So you've got two things, and then they've both got to be, anything that exists has to inherently exist. But then they're in trouble then. they've got to say, well, how are those two going to come together?
So if
They
we
say, "Oh, but this is one nature, this is one substance," yeah, but then, so that means fire and hot and burning are not inherently like they're not different from each other then.
yeah,
But
so
we said they are different from each other.
yeah, yeah.
They have to accept that because one's a characteristic, one's the object characterized.
Yeah.
So they've got to decide.
So the point is
Right.
really,
They have to be inherently different.
yeah. So where you are basically debating against the view of inherent existence, these arguments, work. You get what I mean? That's why he's bringing them in. He's trying to defeat that particular view.
But if they try and turn the argument against us, what do we say then?
Well, exactly.
Well, how do you explain it then? Okay, you're accusing us of not being able to explain it. How do you explain it? So how does the consequentialist sort of kind of go for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it. I won't be able to say that. That's obviously why we're here. It's perceived as hot and burning, and then we add a label to it. But then that suggests it was already there because we perceived it and then add a label. And then to say we come across it is equally the same problem.
Yeah, labels. That's part of the issue somehow. I don't really want to stress on that one. But fire and hot and burning, they're both the object, right? The label fire is a word, yeah. So that's not fire itself. The label fire is term, a sort of verbal expression to describe the object. So that has to be thought about a bit. But here it's like the we're talking about the things, the actual tangible objects, yeah, not the sound which sort of describes them and communicates them to other people. Yeah, so you've got any offers, Sindhu? So how do we, if somebody says, well, how do you say the characteristic, the characteristic characterize the object characterized? In our own system, Nagarjuna system. Yeah, well, I think it's like, it's just, it's two ways of coming at the same thing, right? Two ways of coming at the same thing. So you just look at when we meditate on the selfness of the person, right? We say, yeah, well, there's the aggregates. You're thinking about yourself, or looking at another person, but yourself is just fine there. So you either think yourself as like all these aggregates, many aggregates. You can see when you look at, what's here, what makes you up, you can say, oh, well, there's loads of parts. Yeah, there's a mind, and there's eye consciousness, there's ear consciousness, and there's legs. If you're going to be a human being, you have nice legs, and you have nice long arms, and you have nice fingers. Most human beings, and the ordinary human being, let's say, then you have all this digestive system and this and that and that. That you can just see all these parts are here, right? But another way of looking at yourself, oh yeah, I'm just a guy, and I'm just a human being. Yeah, I'm just a mortal human being. I'm just one human being. So the main difference between those two is one is many, and many parts, and the other is individual. It's just one. It's single, one person. So you look at what's here. This is when I'm saying this. If I'm thinking about myself, or what's over here? What is on this side? What is what is here then? So you can say, yeah, there's many parts, and there's loads of parts, loads of different, some of them mental, some are physical. So you can talk about many then, or you can think of the same. What's here? What am I looking at, or what am I experiencing? Oh well, that's just me. That's just the one person, isn't it? That's just this guy who's sitting here, right? So it's just the same substance in each case. The many parts are the one whole, isn't it? So the difference between them is merely from the side of the observer. There's nothing from the side of the object saying this is a many object or this is a single object. It's just, you know, it's just how you decide to look at it. I'm looking at a many type of object of experience. No, I'm looking at a single object of experience. That's just your conception is deciding that. Do your aggregates and yourself, do they appear to you, do they appear to direct perception as you know, different? Or are they the same substance? You and your aggregates, yeah? To the direct perceiver to which they both appear, they do not appear separately. No differentiation for your direct perceiver. Yeah, that's the same with the object characterized and the characteristic. You see, fire and hot and burning. The only difference between fire and hot and burning is the one that the mind imposes. You know.
Is it Graham? Can I ask?
Yes.
So, to a direct perceiver, can contradictory qualities appear as the same nature? Like one and many?
One and many, that's your example of contradictory qualities, is it?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, can't they? I mean, you can look over in Finland, you have lots of forests, I know that. So you go to somewhere outside the city and look over on one of your walks, you know, get on a little hill, you look over this huge amount of forest. So then you can say, well, what are you looking at? And one person can say, oh, I'm looking at a nice big forest. And another person, you know, you ask another person, what are you looking at? And they'll say, oh, I'm looking at lots and lots of beautiful trees. So the forest is one, the trees are many. So what's the problem with them being same nature?
Yeah, but to the same direct perceiver.
To the direct perceiver to which they both appear, they do not appear separately.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's no problem then. Some people see it as one forest, some people see it as many trees, but both are correct consciousness. Nobody is accusing a person there of having a wrong consciousness.
But if there is only one direct perceiver?
Well, they don't appear differently to the direct perceiver. So the direct perceiver is just taking in the information. It's not discriminating. I'm looking at one, I'm looking at many, I'm looking at this or that. It's just you know, receiving what's there, isn't it? And then the conception comes along and say, oh no, what information have my eyes given me? You know? So I say, oh, I'm looking at many trees here. But a moment later, the same person could say, oh, I'm looking at one forest. Maybe not at exactly the same time. I'm looking at one forest and many trees, but he'd have to switch between the two conceptions, wouldn't he? He'd have to hold one forest in his mind, then let that one fade, and then now looking at now many trees. But to the direct perceiver, the icons, there's no difference in appearance whatsoever. Very significant. So we'll come back to that. I'm not getting down to the bottom of, you know, how does that lead to emptiness? Which is, you know, it does lead to emptiness. But just to tie it in with this characteristic and object characterized, you see, so characteristic and object characterized at fire and hot and burning, just like, you know, the one forest or the many trees, or the one self and the many aggregates. You know, the difference is only in the way the mind is looking at it. And, you know, this point is then, so if you say there is one forest and if there are many trees, you know, and both of those perceptions are correct perceptions and none of them are wrong consciousnesses, neither of them are wrong consciousnesses, then you've got two different phenomena. You've got one forest and you've got many trees. And if they're inherently existent, then, you know, how do they join together? If they're inherently existent, there could be one inherently existent forest, just existing by way of its own nature, independently of anything else. And you got to have many trees set up there, existing independently by way of its own nature, you know, by its own power. So then you'd have to have two inherently existent objects, which, you know, are there. As soon as two things are different, like the forest and the many trees, they're inherently different. And if they're inherently different, it means, you know, by way of their own nature, they have, you know, different characteristics, you know, and the characteristics don't rely on each other. The forest doesn't rely on the forest. The forest doesn't rely on the trees for its characteristics, you know, and the trees, you know, don't kind of have any relation to the forest, because they're both inherently what they are by way of their own power. And so the whole idea of something being, you know, the same nature collapses. So the idea of the sutra followers having understood this idea of same nature and conceptual distinctions, yes, it's all right as far as it goes, but in the end, it's doesn't stand up to the analysis of the consequentialist school. Yeah, so we're getting into some deep water now. Hey. So yeah, that's going a bit, you know, just Buddhapalita's opening remarks, you know, bringing in something from another chapter. Nagarjuna doesn't start there. Nagarjuna starts with arising, lasting, and destruction itself. Verse 1 is talking about arising. So we haven't got there yet, but we will next week. So if you remember the document of discussion points, so we've really been talking about this discussion point number 3 there. So go and have a look at this discussion point number 1 and 2 for next time we meet, next Thursday. So then we have a little bit of, you know, the conventional understanding of arising, lasting, and destruction. Without worrying too much about their ultimate nature right away, you know, what does it mean, arising, destruction, arising, lasting, and destruction, just on the ordinary level? You know, is pot, what's the question? Is pot a common base of being each of the 3 arising, lasting, and ceasing? Arising, lasting, and destruction? Is a pot a common locus, a common base of those 3? Is it each of those 3? And if it is the common locus of being the 2 A and B, is it necessarily both A and B simultaneously? So that's kind of directed, that follows from the first question. I'm not going to explain the connection now, but you might say, oh, it is a common base of those 3, but it isn't all 3 at the same time or something like that, you see. So you have to decide about that. And then the last one, the pot arises, lasts, and ceases. If somebody says that to you, should you say accept or not? And then that was the Drapen-Loseling definition that's in the notes on the bottom of the first page, which isn't, it doesn't just say a conditioned thing is a common locus, a common base of the 3 arising, lasting, and destruction. It doesn't say that, you know, it's got a slightly different definition. So look up the definition in the Drapen-Loseling text. So it's just isn't saying it's just a common base of those 3, but if it did say that, would it be a fault? And then there's the other Sarajaya definition. So giving the definition of the conditioned phenomenon as disintegrating. So, you know, just think about that and the questions that follow: gross impermanence, subtle impermanence. We need to follow those up a bit. Okay, then, better stop there.